So I just want to bring our attention to the global study on 1325. So I have the opportunity to be on the high-level advisory group to Radhika Kumaraswamy, who is the author for the global study. It will be presented to, obviously it goes to the Secretary General, but it will be tabled at the UN Security Council open debate on 1325 on October 22nd, and we'll release the report a few days ahead of that report. But we've started to look at the draft, and one of the things that Radhika has talked about is that the global study on women, peace and security is about changing the structures and policies of the United Nations. And that from the very beginning, a major part of the report is about bringing the voices of women from the field to the Security Council. So that's really important, because that strategy very much resonates with what we are doing, as Josie has said, that, you know, since we gathered back in 2007 and started developing our advocacy through our regional media and policy network. I have a more in-depth paper that I'll share, but I think it's really important to also talk about the localizing of the Security Council resolutions, also in line with UNSCR 2122 and the CEDAW General Recommendation 30, which make that connection in terms of women, peace and security to our human rights, and the connection with CEDAW and why it's so important for our governments not just to ratify CEDAW, but to really put strategies in place, as well as the development agenda. So human security, human development, and peace and security is what we've been talking about at the regional level. The global study, as Sonia mentioned, Radhika's had a chance to meet with the advisory group, but also to present to members of the Security Council and other UN member states recently. And she talks about the breaking news research that illustrates without a doubt the linkages between the participation of women in peace and sustainable peace, and that women's inclusion is critical if you want to operationalize a Security Council resolution. And there are a couple of key messages coming through. One is the need to take the lead in breaking the cycle of increased militarism and militarization. I mean, one of the things that's just happened, which I don't think is a good example of when we have had elections or parliament convened, is that the United States government has just decided that, well, it will now resume selling arms to Fiji. The US needs to be held accountable to the Arms Trade Treaty, and Fiji needs to be pushed in terms of compliance or ratification with the Arms Trade Treaty. You can't simply just start buying and selling weapons. So there's a new kind of situation, and one of the things is the fact that there's so much being spent on militarization and so little of resources and energy going to early warning systems, the prevention of conflict mechanisms, the non-violent methods of protection of citizens. The second message that's coming out of the global study, and I really like this message, it's saying, listen to the women. So once again, the amount of money that is being spent in formulating state-centric national action plans and the focus only on women's participation in parliament or the military, without looking at women's participation and access to local government and local governance structures. What do women need at the local level? And we're one of the co-conveners of the Fiji Women's Forum, and that was a very clear message from the last Women's Forum as well, of the need to invest in women's participation in local government and local governance. We have less than 30% in district advisory councils just in Fiji, and we know that there's a lot of energy and resources that's also gone from the UN to just focus on one tier, rather than looking at the participation of women, where they can be the drivers of change or prevention. And so there needs to be a refocusing on access to decision-making and power. The other message is, and clearly it is of a concern, is that we're talking about countering violent extremism requires not just military action, but political, economic, and social measures. So if you're talking about violent extremism, there needs to be better analysis of the political, economic, and social drivers behind such extremist measures. So there is a need to actually once again provide education, open up opportunities, and lessening the other drivers of extremism, and that in this regard, women have a very key, if you want to call traditional role to play as peace builders, but they must be their own leaders. We're no longer just the implementers of policy, but we must lead in the way in which strategies must move forward. And you could say that one of the reasons why violent extremism is on the rise is you've only had a very militaristic response to these actions rather than looking at it from a non-violent peace-building perspective. The other message is that central to the agenda of women, peace and security is, in terms of peacemaking, peacekeeping and peace-building, it's no longer about men speaking to men or with male facilitators. We've had the example, as we know, from Bougainville. We've had the example of where Josie was amongst women who crossed the bridge, and I have to just take like 30 seconds to tell the story. So back in 2004, when we started to document around 1325 to create awareness, I was speaking to a woman called Afu Billy from the Solomon Islands, who, with Josephine and others, were part of the Women for Peace. So just as we had the Blue Ribbon campaign, they had the Blue campaign as well. You were wearing scarves in 2000. And so Afu and Josie went out to mediate amongst the warring factions. So you had one group of ex-combatants on one side of the bridge. They went, the mothers gave food, talked to them, and then they had to cross the bridge to go to the other side to meet the other group. And as they're walking along, they said to each other, oh, what if those people get angry because we've just been talking to the other group? What do we do? And so they looked, they had men with guns on this side, men with guns behind them, and they said, oh, but there are crocodiles down the bottom, so let's just keep walking. So they crossed the bridge regardless of the guns on either side, but more fearful of the crocodiles under the bridge. But this was about women speaking to women, but yet when it came for the Townsville Peace Agreement, very similar to the Bougainville Peace Agreement, the women were not there. Just as in 2000, there was a lot of visibility about the Blue Ribbon Peace Vigil, yet when the envoys flew in, they went up and spoke to George Speight and his group, they went and they spoke to the military, and they forgot the women. And so in terms of building sustainable peace, if you only talk to 50% of the population, sustainable peace, sustainable development is not going to happen. We have also three very clear messages, given that despite having a reference group, the Pacific Forum has not consulted with the reference group on the way forward of the Regional Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. So we have a couple of recommendations that we've been highlighting. Rebranding. We've got to move away from simply talking about action plans to action strategies. We've been so focused on having action plans that we haven't actually gone anywhere with operationalizing. So this is really about operationalization in terms of security sector governance, in terms of peacekeeping, as well as humanitarian assistance. And we need to hold this political commitment not just to the gender equality agenda of the forum that is only ratified by independent states, but recognize that we still have non-independent states in our region. And we want any action plan on 1325 to also hold member states accountable where they still are non-independent states. So whether it's the issue of West Papua or in terms of Tahiti and Linda's, the French colonies, we need to be able to make sure that it's accountable, and that's why it has to be compliant with the 22 Pacific Island countries and territories, which is where it emerged from through the regional meeting of Pacific Women's Ministers and the SBC. We need to make sure there's a mobilization of resources for women on the ground in their communities to build peace. It's not just about member states. And if our countries are going to be peacekeepers, we also want accountability and broadening notions of security. And finally, 1325 has got to be the tool that brings about the shift from reaction to prevention.